All right, so welcome back, everybody. I guess this is technically the first class we've done. So yeah, this is gonna be basic spirit introductions. We decided to split them into two different classes here. One for vodka and cognac slash brandy slash all other sorts of spirits of those, and then also tequila and rum will be together as well. So I will be helping you guys through this class. My name is Lerone, bar manager at Aventura, and this is Sean. He is also a bartender here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Sean, bartender, and I bar back.
The man. All right, great. Also known as Chino. Keep that in mind. All right, great. So yeah, we'll get started with a couple of questions here. Pretty much the depth of this class here is going to be talking about what a spirit is, kind of all the hard science that goes behind it, just making that a little easier, a little more approachable. And Sean here is going to help us out just a bit with kind of helping guide us through the questions. So we'll get started with what is distillation. Do you know what is distillation?
Distillation is the process in which the cable guy comes to your house and installs your cable. It's called distillation because it's at your house. If it was at somebody else's house, it'd be called distillation.
Oh, sorry, Chino. That's unfortunately incorrect in this conversation. For today, distillation is going to be referencing how spirits are made. So distillation will be essentially starting with fermented grain, fruit, vegetable, spice, anything that you essentially a sugar source. Okay, so we'll start with that, and we'll have to let that ferment. So fermentation is, what is fermentation, Chino?
Fermentation, it's a process in which when you're making the booze, you blow bubbles into it, and somehow, some way, it makes it really, really potent, especially on the nose. You can hear it a little bit too.
Fortunately, you're a little off there, Chino. So fermentation is actually going to be CO2 and alcohol produced from sugar and yeast. Okay, so it's sugar plus yeast. You can write this down. Plus sugar plus yeast equals CO2 and alcohol. Okay, so we'll take our sugar source, which will be, in the sense of vodka, it'll be grain. There's a lot of work they have to do to harvest the sugar out of the grain to get the sugar, but they'll add that with a specific yeast. So a lot of the yeasts come down to, or a lot of the products really are specific to their specific yeast strands. To recreate yeast strands, you have to, have one strand that never dies, and you have to continue to let it grow and grow and grow and grow to keep that strain alive. Otherwise, when they make new products, they have new yeast strands. So starting with that, they've got their specific yeast, like Kettle One's yeast. So they'll take their yeast plus the sugar, and that'll get them their alcohol. But essentially, what we're looking at is lower proof products from fermentation. So beer, your wines, your barley wines, your sake, those types of things. So those are just going to come from natural fermentation. So to try to concentrate that alcohol content, what we're going to do is we're going to distill it. So through distillation, we'll be taking essentially, through distillation, we'll be essentially taking that alcohol content from that fermented product and distilling it. So by distilling it, what we're going to do is we're going to add a heat source. Okay, so by adding that heat source, it's going to alcohol has a higher or a lower boiling point than water does. So there'll essentially be a big vat, right? So try to think about these glasses as your vat. So when we get started, our fermented product will be in here. My hand will be the heat source, and we'll apply it there. Boom. So now this is going to be going up, and as soon as it starts to steam, it will essentially be covered. But it won't be entirely covered because as soon as it starts to condense up here, it's going to precipitate down here. So that will be collected into another vat. And when it comes out of here, it'll essentially be almost 100% alcohol. We're talking 180 proof, 190 proof, right? So to collect that alcohol, as soon as they have it to where the recipe calls, then they've got their concentrated alcohol source, and they will cut it, or they'll continue to distill it again, right? So essentially, that's how they're going to be getting their high alcohol content. And so when we say proof as opposed to ABV, Chino, for some clarification,
Proof. It's definitely not ABV. I believe ABV stands for attracting big vines, and it's what was the first word? Proof.
Proof. Yeah.
Yes, you don't need any proof when the vines come down on you.
Unfortunately not, Chino. So ABV is going to be alcohol by volume. Okay. At least in this circumstance, but I think you're absolutely right. And proof is going to be essentially whatever that alcohol by volume is times 2. Okay, so when you see something that's going to be 80 proof, it'll be 40% ABV, 40% alcohol by volume. So each one of these bottles is 40% ABV. And the reason that's so important is it dictates what a spirit is. So all of those factors being thrown into the mix, Chino, what would you consider a spirit?
A spirit. That's when you're hunting animals and you throw the spear out, you chuck it. It's called a spirit.
That's actually right. That's actually right. But today our version is going to be a spirit in the sense that it is anything that is fermented and distilled. It's a distillate. Okay, so it's got to be a distillate of fermented grain, fruit, vegetables, or any sugar source. Okay, and it's got to have an ABV of at least 40%, which means it's got to be at least how much proof, Gino?
A lot of proof in this instance, not when the vines are actually hitting your gut, but in this instance,
80 proof.
80. That's right.
80 proof. That's right. Because
80
it's times 2. That's fantastic. Yeah. All right. Great. Cool. Well, moving on, we'll talk about what vodka is, and we'll talk about what we can add post distillation, all that stuff. So thank you so much, Chino, for participating in this program today.
Thank you for letting me participate.
Oh, absolutely. He's here to help learn. Thanks. So aside from that, we've got other fun things to talk about. So what can be added post distillation? So post distillation, we've got things along the lines of water and more of that same base spirit, right? So with the vodka, they can continue to add more distilled vodka, or they can add water. Either way, if they add anything else, whether it be a sugar source of any kind, that be a vegetable or anything that you use to ferment, that's going to cut it down from a spirit to a cordial. Okay, so to remain its integrity as a spirit, it's very important that only water or alcohol or another base spirit is added. Okay, in certain instances, especially when we start talking about cognac and getting to brandies and getting to whiskeys, it's very important that not any of those things can be added afterwards. But in this showcase of a specific spirit, that's acceptable. So, what is vodka? Vodka is going to be, like we said, from fermented grain. So again, they're going to have to extract the sugar source out of the grain. And so a lot of these as the vodkas vary, the base is very different. It doesn't necessarily have to be grain. When we say vegetable, in terms of like Chopin, we've got ingredients like potatoes. So this is going to be a potato-based vodka. Okay. So of the vodkas that we have up here, we have 2 Polish vodkas, and the Polish vodkas are going to be the Chopin and the Belvedere. These 2 vodkas are ironically also the most expensive vodkas that we carry in the house. So if you're looking to upsell, I would definitely want to push one of these 2 products. Aside from the Polish vodkas, we've also got a Russian vodka. We've got a vodka from Holland, and we've got a couple other vodkas down below here. The Reka, which is going to be an Icelandic vodka, and then a couple of American-made vodkas as well. So we'll get into those in just a bit. So vodka in America and vodka coming to America and why it's so important to us now. We like to think about vodka as something that's going to essentially be tasteless, right? They say the best vodka in the world tastes like nothing. Which is a hint, hint, nudge, nudge. You want to write that one down. So it's essentially it comes through the multiple times of distillation. Very few spirits, if any spirits, are distilled just once. They're always going to be refined to really get out any of those impurities. And that's really what vodka showcases. Gin, on the other hand, or rum, on the other hand, they go to accent other flavor profiles or accent parts of their spirits that are whether they're from the base or whether through infusions. So like juniper, coriander, fennel, those are all flavors that you want to accent when making a great gin, right? And same with rum, you really want to showcase the sugar cane, the raw sugar cane, the earthiness from the root. Whereas vodka tries to clear out all of those impurities and make it as clear and as clean as possible. It does have a very distinct taste to it. It's something that you have to taste for yourself, but essentially that's just the alcohol that you're tasting. Okay, so vodka moving into America, we do kind of have a lot to credit the Russians for this movement. In terms of fighting over who originally, came up with the concept of vodka is night and day. The Italians, the Poles, in Russia, Scandinavia, Ukraine, they all claim to be the originators. But at any rate, nobody really knows. They really think it's somewhere it's either Poland or Russia, but nobody really knows. Everybody claims that they started it. So vodka in America started through Vladimir Smirnov, who was actually the head distiller and owner of a distillery for the Tsar in Russia. By fear and intimidation, well, just fear, I guess, not necessarily an intimidation. He decided to sell his distillery instead of serving the Tsar and living amongst the Tsar his entire life, and fled to America and brought his family here. But he still possessed the skills to make that same product. So from Smirnov, OV instead of OFF to make it more approachable to Americans, the label was changed, and yeah, he did a lot to bring it into the States. Another huge thing that really propelled vodka into the state was the cocktails, the classic cocktail martini, the classic cocktail martini is what it's called, the classic cocktail, if you will, which is just going to be a standard martini. So usually about 1 part vermouth, 4 parts vodka, and then olives are twisted to garnish. So James Bond was a huge perpetuator of that, and he in all of his movies it became a very masculine thing to drink straight vodka, to drink vodka in a martini, to drink vodka on the rocks. It was a very masculine thing, and even now these days, Kettle One's marketing is, gentlemen, this is vodka, right? So it's got a very specific demographic to drink this straight and drink this all night. So the idea is there's not so much sugar added and whatnot, less of a hangover and all those things, but nonetheless, tasteless. Okay, huge proponents in terms of cocktails that were extremely helpful were cocktails like the Moscow Mule, which is going to be lime juice, vodka, and ginger beer. There's also the cocktail of Bloody Mary to help your hangovers with the mimosas as well. When you wake up in the morning and you're feeling hungover, it's one of the worst feelings ever. If you haven't experienced it, hopefully you never do. But waking up feeling hungover in the morning, ironically, your head is sore, you have a headache, you're feeling sick, nauseous, and the last thing you want to do is to even think about drinking again. When really your body's fighting it so bad, and the best thing for it is actually a little bit more of that alcohol to wean yourself off, right? Instead of just sleep. But the only thing you can really do is time. So to help ease the blow, a lot of people would drink alcoholic beverages in the morning. And so two of those biggest beverages are going to be mimosas, and they're going to be Bloody Marys as well, because Bloody Marys offer you the opportunity to have a little bit more potassium. You get all the nutrients from fresh veggies and fruits, and it's almost like a meal with a little bit of vodka. But again, after a heavy night of drinking, the last thing you want to taste, whether or not it's good for you, is the alcohol. So vodka is the perfect component for that. Okay. So again, another huge thing that definitely helped us out. Moving forward, though, we've got differences between the two. There's a thing called New World vodka and Old World vodka, right? So in the Old World vodka, in the Old World at least, their vodkas are all grain based, so grain or potato, grain of any sort. Whereas in the New World, technically vodka can be made from anything. So you've got things like Ciroc that we would consider more of a grappa or a brandy in America, but they label themselves as a vodka to be a little bit more approachable. It's made from grapes instead of just grains or potatoes. Whereas in the Old World, and when I say the Old World, I mean more along the lines of Europe, they have to be those things. They have to be grain or potato. So of all these vodkas that we have up here, we have the Chopin is the only potato vodka up here, and the rest are grain based. But we've got still differences from that point on. So not only grain based, but specifically Russian tends to have a different texture than especially a vodka like the Chopin. They're very, very different in their mouthfeel, and they're very, very different in the flavor profiles. So when we think about potato vodkas, we want to think about things like that are creamy, right? Big mouthfeel, a little bit more viscous. Whereas the Russian vodkas are more along the lines of an oilier texture. Goes down a little easier, not as much mouthfeel, a little bit more tasteless, if you will, but just a lot less viscous. Okay, so texture is a huge way that they break down the differences between the vodkas, and a blind taste test, very, very difficult to tell which one is which. So in addition to that, other Old World styles that we have, we've got things that it really comes down to filtration. So one huge thing, one vodka we don't carry is Absolute. And instead we carry Reka. So Reka is going to be an Icelandic, whereas the Absolute is going to be Swiss. But a huge proponent of filtration system is also ice filtration. So there's charcoal filtration. Belvedere's Select, and they're huge on it, but their last round of filtration actually takes place through diamonds. So they really get out every impurity that they possibly could, right? So Another huge proponent is the ice. So ice filtration, the colder you are, obviously it's a lot easier to market there if that's what you're going for. So Icelandic, like Reka, Icelandic, it's extremely cold, and that's how they market themselves as one of the the coldest filtration systems in the world, if not the coldest filtration system in the world. So if you're behind that, obviously you want to buy that product. But it really comes down to tasting them. So I definitely encourage you to taste your own. In our well here, we've got the Tito's vodka. This is going to be from Austin, Texas. Delicious vodka. Some people call for it over Belvedere, over Grey Goose. Again, it's all about your palate. So people are always pleasantly surprised that we have this one in the well. So great thing to let your tables know. And another option that we have for another American-made vodka is going to be the Death's Door. We carry their gin, but now we carry their vodka as well. So Death's Door is going to be based out of Wisconsin. We do a lot of collaboration with them, including luncheons. Their owner's making an appearance here in the fall. So lots of fun things that we do with them. And again, American made, and on the other side of the bay. So one of our neighbors is close to local as we can get. But some people will ask for those American made vodkas, and those are great options to upsell them on. Okay. Aside from that, the biggest things to take from that for sure are going to be the proof. And part of filtering, it's one of the biggest reasons why vodkas put themselves above somebody else. Somebody filters their vodka 10 times, 12 times, as opposed to 800 times, 300 times of filtration. That's one way. Another huge area to help cut those impurities is going to be how high of a proof they're going to distill to, right? So how much of their crop are they losing by if you only distill to 190 proof, right? Like Belvedere is really famous for. You only distill to 190 proof, then instead of distilling to maybe 170 proof and getting that much more of a liquid before you cut it down, you've got a lot less taste before you just cut it down with clear distilled water. So you definitely yield less, which is why the price goes up a little bit higher, and you clean out a lot more of those impurities. So just to recap, biggest things to know: New World vodkas, they must be made from, and again, they can be made from anything. Literally anything. Any sugar source can technically be named vodka in America. In the Old World, vodka must be made from. We're talking potatoes. We're talking grains. Okay, and give some examples like rye, right? The best vodka in the world tastes like it's tasteless. We actually don't really taste anything aside from the alcohol itself, and that's the idea. And on that note, vodka cranberries, vodka orange juices, screwdrivers. When we sell these things, when we push those things out, sometimes you'll get that guest that says, it doesn't taste like there's any vodka in here. I don't even taste any vodka. Well, because it's so tasteless, and because of its structure, when you add things to it, it actually takes on and morphs to that flavor, right? It's like the stem cell of spirits. It will morph to that flavor. So when you add cranberry, it starts to taste more like cranberry. It starts to fill all those holes in your palate. So a lot of the times, that's how you know you're drinking a good vodka. You really don't taste it too much. Okay. So yeah. That's the biggest thing to take from the vodka. Any other questions, I please encourage you guys to go ahead and ask me another time. So we'll move on to Brandy here in just a bit. And we're back. And now we're going to be going into brandies. What is brandy? And brandy wine, cognac, Armagnac, Spanish brandy, brandy de Jerez, you name it. We're going to start tackling it right now. So just to recap, what is a spirit? Again, we talked about a spirit being a distillate of a fermented grain, right? Fermented grain, fruit, vegetable, or sugar source of any kind, right? So when we think brandy wine, we also like to think about this as possibly, arguably, the original spirit, right? The eau de vie, which is the water of life. Right. So this is, again, going to be one of the originals. So when we think about brandy, and that's what we call it now for short, it was originally called brandy wine, spelled like brandy widgeon. You'll see it there on your sheet. So the brandy is a little different. Why do you think they might call it brandy wine? Well, brandy wine is because it's actually a sense of brandy in the wine. So the wine, it starts itself with, grapes, grape juice, which is going to be fermented, whether it's spontaneously fermented or fermented with added yeast, right? So the reason that this is so important when I say spontaneously is because the majority of vineyards actually don't add yeast to their wine. Because of all the natural habitat in their vineyards, there's natural yeast found in the vineyards. So that yeast catches on to the skins, and when you mash throughout the mashing of it, you're actually going to be getting natural, spontaneous fermentation with raw grapes, which are grown in the best areas because of the best sunlight, X, Y, and Z. And then because of all the natural yeast that's found there, it's going to yield you a much better brandy or better wine, right? So that is a pretty important factor. The grapes really come down to it is what is really the deciding factor. So from that point on, they've got their wine. Their wine could be anywhere between 13 and 17% alcohol, maybe 19% alcohol. And from that point, they're going to distill. Right? But you're going to have a little bit different of a flavor profile than you're going to have from something that's going to be tasteless, right? Or something that's going to be grain-based, that kind of sugar. The sugar's a lot sweeter. It's a lot fruitier, right? It's in forms that we already identify as sweet sugar. When you bite grain or when you bite into wheat bread, you don't think sweet necessarily, but you're actually metabolizing a lot of sugar when you eat wheat bread. So it's different in that sense, and so we can expect different characteristics. So moving forward, it's going to be a distillate of fermented grape juice or wine. Now, brandy is the grand category for everything that we have up here. Okay, so there's cognac. We have 3 cognacs in the back row here. We've got the Hennessy VS. Yeah. We've also got the Remy Martin VSOP, and we've got the Pierre Ferrand here, which is going to be an amber blend. Okay, and then down here we've got an Armagnac, and we've got a Brandy de Jerez. Right, so in the realms of Armagnac, in the realms of cognac, in the realms of Spanish brandy or Brandy de Jerez, we've got all of these are brandy, right? But not all brandy is cognac. Not all brandy is Armagnac. It's the other way around. Okay, so that's the grand category. So speaking more specifically along the lines of cognac, right? Cognac has a lot of prestige, and it's kind of an intimidating thing to servers, especially when they first get rolling into the subject. But cognac can be definitely one of those things that we see as snobbish. It really falls into the same lines of the wine world for so many different reasons. So one thing about it is cognac itself has to be from Cognac, France, right? So Cognac, France is a region. It's in the north of France, and so they claim, just like the best Pinot Noir growers and the best Champagne, the only Champagne growers, claim that you have to be on this specific latitude in terms of getting the best result for your grapes, right? Because it's all about your product and where it starts, and then you talk about the art of distillation, right? So one food for thought here before we roll into this is, if you get those grapes but they're distilled elsewhere, is the product any different? I'll let you answer that one. I'm not going to. So cognac, though, itself is from Cognac, France, right? Now, the rules and regulation in terms of being called cognac are extremely dictated, I guess, by the areas. Regulated, that's the word I want, regulated. So you can live in cognac, you can grow grapes in cognac, you can make brandy in cognac, but if you don't abide by every law, then it's got to be labeled as a brandy. It can be labeled as a VSOP or an XO brandy, but it cannot be labeled as a cognac if you don't abide by all laws. And it's not just that they're taking you at face value, your distillery at face value, but they're actually regulated by the government. And this is to keep out competitors and to really beef and show off their prestige, right? Again, it comes down to your palate and whatever you like the most, but it's something that's definitely worth tasting and worth experimenting with. Now, when the brandy comes out, it's actually going to be a clear spirit. It's not going to be a dark spirit, as we all see that every one of these bottles is actually a dark spirit. This one's a little chalky, but nonetheless, it's a dark spirit. And that color actually comes from being barrel aged. Okay, so when we see these things on here, just kind of make it a little less intimidating. But when we see the labels on here of VS and VSOP, there are a couple of reasons why they differ. You can see this exact same bottle with a different label on it, with XO, with VSOP, with VS, and the price will drastically become more expensive. So in terms of talking about that, we've got the VS. The VS has to be barrel aged for at least 2 years. Okay, so it has to see at least 2 years in a barrel, right? And that's all of the cognac, all of the brandy that's mixed in. The VSOP has to see at least 4 years, and the XO, which is extra old, is going to be at least 6 years. But usually we're talking more along the lines of 20 years, 22 years, even more so. Okay, so you've got the VS, which is very special, the VSOP, which is very special, old or very superior old pale, and then you've got the XO, which is extra old. Okay, so those are the three major categories that are still commonly used. There's a VVSOP and VVVSOP, but they kind of cut that out with just the XO. Okay, so cognac, specifically cognac, is very much like whiskey in the sense that the youngest cognac that's blended into the barrel has to be 2 years old to be a VS. Okay, so if you do everything, but instead of barrel aging it for 2 years, but you blend a cognac in there that's only a year and a half old, then that's no longer cognac. It's officially a brandy again. Okay. You can't use the VS. You can't use the VS, and you can't use the cognac. So again, there could be 30 different cognacs that go into blending these, which is what makes them extremely expensive. But the youngest cognac is the cognac that's going to take the cake for whatever category it is. So 70% of this Remy Martin, say this is an XO, might be 20 years old. But if 30% of it's 6 years old, then they can still call it an XO and still give it the credit that it's due, right? But on the other end, it could also be 95% 6-year-old and a 5% blend of extra old, which is maybe 22 years old, right? And so it all comes down to whatever their head distiller feels like is a consistent taste. That number will fluctuate, as does the grapes, the harvesting, all of that, all changes. So they really rely on their master distillers. But again, it's more along the lines of protecting that name. And protecting the great name of cognac itself. So some people really love cognac. In terms of brandy, it's their favorite thing to drink. We think about a snifter, a balloon glass, as a brandy snifter, and it's specifically for cognac. And some people are really into Spanish brandy, and some people are really into Armagnac. Okay, but brandy essentially is the whole name for what these spirits are, right? So when we think about any fruit, really, specifically cognac style brandies, these are going to be more along the lines of grape based, right? But just because they're not grape based doesn't mean that they're not brandy. So brandy is a gigantic category, which is why it's considered the water of life, right? Whereas vodka is Russian for the little water, right? This is the water of life. So any fruit that you decide to use, so long as it's fermented and then distilled appropriately, and there's no sugar added after the fact, it's going to be considered a brandy, right? So you've got things like Calvados, okay, apple brandy essentially is what it is. So instead of the grapes, or in addition to the grapes, they're going to take the apples, they're going to take the juice from the apples, they're going to ferment it and then distill it, right? So that's how that will get started. But it could really be any fruit, cherries, it could be apricots, you name it. So long as it's done in the order of what we know to be a spirit. Brandy also happens to be one of the most confusing names for that reason, because there are things like apricot brandy made by Bowles, right, and sour apple pucker brandy, right, which they call brandies, but really are cordials, right. So we know once they add anything after the distillation that's not more of that base spirit or water, that it's officially become a cordial, right? It's going to cut your alcohol content, so it's not going to be, more likely it's not going to be that 80 proof, that 40% ABV that it needs to be to still, take its cake for the spirit. But don't be confused if there are cordials out there that are higher than 40% that are still cordials. They're still liqueurs, right? So it's going backwards essentially. So it sounds confusing, but nonetheless, you have your apple here. Take the juice from that, ferment it, distill it, and becomes a product, right? But say we have that same product, whether it be apple or grape or even vodka, right? And we add apple juice to it. We add apple puree or apricot puree, right? Now instead of that being a spirit, that just became a cordial. But a lot of the times the names are mislabeled as brandies. So you got to do a little investigating. You got to make sure you read between the lines here and really see what you're getting. So Armagnac again is going to be another area in France where they produce delicious brandy as well. Armagnacs tend to be a little bit more focused on the citrus aspect, in the barrel aspect. And the cognacs vary from cognac to cognac. Some of them may be more along the lines of the vanilla notes, and the earthy undertones. And other brandies other cognacs might really want to showcase the grape quality to it, the ripeness of how fresh everything was when they harvested, or show off and showcase the yeast strands that they use and things like that. The mouthfeel. want it to be really smooth. Some cognacs are a little harsher, and that's what they want. So it really comes down to your palate. And so the Demontal, it's a great after dinner opportunity to sell. If somebody's too full for bourbon or somebody's too full for dessert, you can always get them on a cognac. You can always get them on a Demontal Armagnac. Okay, and this one is so citrusy. This is the only Armagnac we carry in the house, but it's so citrusy that what we'll do is we'll, generally speaking, take a Grand Marnier, give it a rinse in the snifter, caramelize the rinse, and then pour this over to really accent some of those citrus notes. Okay, and then moving over to the Brandy de Jerez, right? So it's technically it's called a Spanish brandy, and it's Brandy de Jerez, but by definition, it's actually a cordial. So it's 39% alcohol, which is a red flag that it's not a spirit because it's not 80 proof or 40% ABV. And because of how much barrel it sees, because of all the sugar that's left over in the sherry barrels that it's aged in, it lowers the alcohol content and adds enough of a sugar content to influence its makeup. It's not a spirit anymore. It's officially a brandy. Or it's officially a cordial. So Jerez, we know, means sherry, right? Because we work at a Spanish tapas restaurant. But so the Jerez is also the same area that they make all the sherry in Spain. So we have a pretty extensive list of sherries in the house, all from Jerez, right? So the same area is where they're going to be bottling these brandies. More likely than not, the brandies aren't made there. A lot of the brandies are made in France. Some of them are made in Spain, though. Usually not in Jerez. But when the brandies are imported, they're barrel aged there with those old barrels, or new oak, nonetheless. But that really gives it that sherry flavor profile. So unfortunately, you can see me and you can hear me through the video, but you can't smell these spirits, can't taste them. But had we pour them all out, you would be able to smell what you would more associate blindly with a sherry than you would of a spirit or a brandy. And it really does bleed through for that reason. And people are connoisseurs for Spanish brandy, so great opportunity to get them on a Cardinal Mendoza, $10 upsell at the end of the night. Okay, any of these options are great to end you out. Nice little digestif, settle your stomach. Doesn't need to just be a cordial, but it can also be a spirit. So great opportunity to sell there. Is cognac undoubtedly better than brandy, than other brandies that you find in the world? Not necessarily. Do they have expertise in it? Absolutely. But do they elsewhere? They do. So to say that it's the best in the world is a great marketing objective, but it really comes down to your palate. So you got to taste them for yourself to decide which one you like. And yeah, stay tuned for part 2. We'll be walking into rum and tequila. Chino's not here right now. We'll give him a good shout out and a big thank you for that, and we will see you then.